The toilet in room 214 had been blocked since Thursday. Nobody had touched it because the guest had a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on his door like a tiny declaration of war. Christabel Nash was the one who finally knocked anyway.
Good morning. Housekeeping.
She knocked because her supervisor, Ms. Anita, had a specific look she gave people when she was tired of asking twice. Christabel had already received that look once this morning and had zero interest in seeing it again. She knocked, waited, heard nothing, and let herself in with her master key, calling out a professional "Good morning"
Good morning.
to what she thought was an empty room. The guest had left the window open. October air was moving through the curtains in slow pulls, and the room smelled like cedar and something faintly metallic, the way a man smells when he's been working with his hands all week. Christabel noted this with the detached efficiency of someone who had cleaned dozens of hotel rooms and had long since stopped being surprised by how people lived when they thought no one was watching. Except she was wrong about the room being empty. He came out of the bathroom in a towel, hair dripping, looking down at his phone like he was reading something that required his full attention. He looked up. She looked up. Neither of them moved for 3 long seconds. He was not what she expected at all. She had been expecting the middle-aged guy who usually occupied 214, the one who left antacid tablets on the nightstand and never made his bed. This man was young. He was fine in the kind of way that registers before you even realize you're staring. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow and a strong, sharp jawline. "Sorry," Christabel blurted out. "No, my fault," he said. "I can come back later." "Please don't," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "The toilet has been making a sound like it's grieving." Christabel laughed before she could stop herself. His name, she would learn later from the room logs, was Hyun-woo. He had checked in under that name with a factory worker's salary and a basic credit card. Absolutely nothing about him suggested that his father owned more land in Seoul than some countries owned in total. He was 29 but looked 24, and he had a relaxed, easy manner about him. Christabel, who was a pastor's daughter and a natural judge of character, couldn't quite tell if he was just incredibly confident or incredibly well-practiced. She got to work fixing the toilet. He sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through his phone, before asking her out of nowhere, "Do you think a man who lies about small things can be trusted with big ones?" Christabel, elbow deep in a plumbing situation, didn't miss a beat. "That depends entirely on what he thinks is small." He looked up at her then. She kept her eyes on her work. When she finished, she washed her hands, swapped the old towels for fresh ones, and folded them into the exact swans Ms. Anita had trained them to make. She left room 214 with the professional neutrality she was paid to maintain. She rode the service elevator down to the laundry bay and just stood there for a minute doing absolutely nothing, which was completely unlike her. Then she pulled out her phone and texted her roommate. "Sonia, is your boyfriend good-looking?" Sonia replied in 4 seconds flat. "Why?" Christabel dropped her phone back into her apron pocket and went right back to work. The apartment Christabel shared with Sonia was on the 3rd floor of a building whose elevator had been out of service since June, so Christabel had developed excellent calves from the unplanned exercise she did on the stairs daily. The apartment itself was a battlefield between 2 completely different ways of living. Christabel's half was organized with the precision of someone who believed a clear desk meant a clear mind. Sonia's half looked like a very stylish explosion. They had been roommates for 14 months, reaching that specific level of friendship where total honesty was allowed, but not always welcome. Sonia was Korean American, 25, and the kind of beautiful that made strangers assume she never had to work hard for anything. It annoyed her constantly because she actually worked extremely hard at looking exactly that good. She was a junior account manager at a firm downtown, working under a man named Mr. Collins. He wore custom shirts and had the sort of confident smile that certain women found charming and other women found immediately suspicious. Christabel was firmly in the suspicious category. Sonia knew exactly how Christabel felt and chalked it up to jealousy, mostly because it was the most comfortable excuse available to her. The setup between them had its own rhythm. Christabel studied at the kitchen table from 9 to midnight with intense focus, determined to master medicine through sheer willpower. Sonia came home late on weeknights, smelling like an expensive restaurant where the menus didn't even have prices. Christabel would make tea and say nothing. Sonia would kick off her heels, tell Christabel she worked too hard, and urge her to come out with them sometime. Christabel always said she was fine. But then Hyunwoo would call on Friday evenings, and Sonia's entire tone would shift. Her voice would go soft, the way voices do when they are performing tenderness for someone who actually deserves the real thing. She would sit on the couch with her knees pulled up, laughing at everything Hyunwoo said, telling him she missed him, and asking about his week at the factory. Christabel, studying at the kitchen table, would suddenly become very focused on her anatomy textbook during those calls, rolling her eyes when the lovey-dovey got to the level of restricting her airflow and muttering, "God, when the lovebirds sing to themselves. She could name every single bone in the human body, and she knew exactly what it felt like to hear someone being lied to through a smile. Hyunwoo visited for the first time on the third weekend of October, and he brought groceries. Not wine and flowers, which would have been the typical romantic gesture, but actual groceries. The kind of food that proved he had asked what they needed. He brought ginger, garlic, 2 packs of ramen, a bottle of olive oil, and the exact brand of rice Christabel had been meaning to replace for 2 weeks. She walked in from her Saturday shift to find him sitting at her kitchen table, helping Sonia sort through a bowl of green beans. Christabel froze in the doorway, still wearing her hotel uniform. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "We met yesterday." "Yes, we did. I remember," she said quietly. Sonia looked between the two of them, her eyes narrowing with the sharp attention of a woman who treated information like currency. Christabel decided, with the quiet firmness of a woman raised on scripture and self-discipline, that Hyunwoo was absolutely none of her business. She made this decision on Sunday morning while he was in the kitchen making juk. He had decided the apartment needed the Korean rice porridge, and the warm, savory smell of it was doing something unreasonable to the morning air. She made the decision again on Sunday afternoon when he fixed the loose hinge on the bathroom door that had been swinging wrong for 3 months. She reinforced it on Sunday evening when he sat across from her at the dinner table and asked what she was studying with the genuine curiosity of someone who actually wanted to know. "The renal system," she said. He told her his grandfather had died of kidney failure. He admitted he'd always wished he understood what that meant, beyond the vague, simplified medical terms the doctors used to shield the family from the full weight of what was happening. Christabel put down her fork and explained renal failure to him in plain, everyday language, treating him the way she would one day treat her patients. He listened intently, without his phone in his hand, a rare habit she couldn't help but notice. When she finished, he thanked her like he meant the specific words, not just filling the silence. She picked her fork back up. He went back to his food. At the other end of the table, Sonia was glued to her phone, at something completely outside of this room. Hyunwoo noticed. He looked at Sonia, a dark expression crossing his face for less than 2 seconds before he masked it completely. Christabel saw it. Her father's church congregants had been hiding things in plain sight for as long as she could remember. He had taught her, without meaning to, that the most important part of what someone was saying was usually the part they chose to keep inside. she was not going to get involved. Until 3 weeks later, when she did. It was a Wednesday, one of Sonia's usual late nights. Christabel came home at 11 to find her roommate already there, which was wrong. Sonia was sitting in the kitchen in her work clothes with her mascara running down her face in 2 dark lines, which was worse. Christabel stood in the doorway, trying to read a situation she didn't yet understand. She put down her bag, put the kettle on, and sat down at the table. Sonia swallowed hard. He has a wife. Christabel said nothing. There was nothing to say that Sonia didn't already know, and she didn't need a lecture right now. He told me it was complicated, Sonia whispered, staring at the table. And I believed him because I wanted to. Now I feel like an idiot, and I am not an idiot. You are not an idiot, Christabel said softly. He took me to that exclusive restaurant downtown where they bring the bread before you even sit down, Sonia said, her voice cracking. I thought that meant something. Christabel poured the tea, placed the mug on the table, and pushed it toward her. Sonia wrapped both hands around it, staring blankly into the steam. Then she looked up. Don't tell Hyunwoo. There it was. Christabel had felt it coming the way you feel a storm before it breaks. A sudden drop in the air pressure. She looked at Sonia steadily. Sonia sighed. I know what you're thinking. What am I thinking? You're thinking I should tell him myself. I'm thinking that man comes here every single weekend with groceries, Christabel said, her voice level. He fixes things that aren't his to fix, and he calls you on Friday nights like it's the absolute best part of his week. Sonia looked back down at her tea. I'm not going to tell him, Christabel added quietly. But Sonia... I know, Sonia whispered. And she did know. That was the real tragedy. Sonia wasn't stupid or careless. She was simply a woman who had looked at 2 different futures, chosen the one that promised more, and discovered too late that more could also mean nothing. It all depended on what her boss in the custom shirts decided to do with his Tuesday evenings. Christabel went to bed and lay on her back, staring at the dark ceiling for a long time. Above her, through the thin apartment floor, she could hear the faint sound of footsteps moving around in the kitchen. She thought about Hyunwoo calling on Friday. She thought about the way he listened. She thought about the rice, specifically the rice, the exact brand bought without being asked. Christabel pressed her palms flat against the mattress and reminded herself very firmly exactly whose boyfriend he was. He came over the following weekend, and Christabel immediately made herself scarce. She gave herself the most convincing excuses possible. She had studying to do. She always had studying to do. It was true, but it was also highly convenient, and she was honest enough with herself to admit both. She was sitting in the library when her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name she didn't expect. Hyunwoo. She stared at it like she had just stumbled on an unexpected step in the dark. He had clearly gotten her number from Sonia. The text read, Sonia said you left your green cardigan at the apartment. I put it on the chair in your room. Also, I made extra juke. It's in the fridge with your name on it. The little drawing of a face at the end was either winking or had something stuck in its eye. Christabel read the message twice. Then, she flipped her phone face down on the library table, stared at her anatomy notes, and learned absolutely nothing for the next 11 minutes. She finally flipped it back over and texted, Thank you. He replied instantly, The renal chapter. How's it going? She typed back, Harder than the cardiovascular. His response came a few seconds later. You'll get it. You explain things like someone who already understands them and is just remembering the words. Christabel stared at the screen for a long time, her heart doing a strange little flip. She typed, "That's a strange thing to say." He replied, "Is it wrong, though?" She didn't answer that one. She dropped her phone into her bag and went back to her notes. Surprisingly, she understood the entire renal chapter with perfect clarity for the rest of the afternoon, a fact she chose not to look into too closely. November arrived the way it always did in the city, quietly at first, then with complete commitment. The apartment grew colder in the mornings. Sonia started leaving for work earlier, which Christabel understood to mean that her boss, Mr. Collins, had finally been replaced by someone new. She didn't ask. Sonia didn't volunteer information. They moved around each other in the kitchen like two people who had reached the absolute limit of what they were willing to discuss. Hyunwoo still called on Fridays. Christabel still became incredibly interested in her textbooks during those calls. And the juke still appeared in the fridge on weekends, her name written on the container in his handwriting. Small, precise, and leaning slightly to the left. The handwriting of someone who had been taught to write carefully and never lost the habit. Christabel had stopped pretending she didn't look forward to it. This was the thing about Christabel Nash that her father's congregation would have found shocking. To them, she was Pastor Nash's focused daughter, the one going to medical school, the one who arrived early to church and stayed late to stack chairs. What they didn't know, what she barely admitted to herself, was that she had a specific weakness for people who knew just how to love properly. Not grand gestures, not exclusive restaurants where the bread came before you even sat down. Just attention. The rare quality of being seen by someone who wasn't performing for an audience. Hyunwoo paid attention the way breathing paid attention to lungs, without announcement, without any awareness that it was remarkable. She was in serious trouble, she knew it, and she did absolutely nothing about it because there was nothing appropriate to do. Then, on a Friday evening, Sonia came home while Hyunwoo was on the phone with her. Christabel heard Sonia's voice go strange, a new thinness in her laugh, a pause in the wrong place. She knew before the call even ended that something had broken. Sonia hung up, came to stand in the kitchen doorway, and looked at Christabel like a woman carrying a bag that had finally become too heavy. "I have to tell him," Sonia said. "Okay," Christabel replied. "I've been seeing someone else. For 4 months, Sonia. He just asked me if I was happy. I couldn't say yes, and I couldn't tell him the truth, so I told him I was tired. I think he knows." Christabel looked at her roommate. "What do you need from me right now?" "Nothing. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who already knew." Hyunwoo came over the next morning. He brought groceries, but he didn't bring his usual easy Friday smile. The apartment felt the loss immediately, the way a room feels when a lamp is switched off. He and Sonia spoke in the bedroom with the door shut. Christabel sat at the kitchen table, staring at an anatomy page she had already read 4 times without absorbing a single word. She couldn't hear their exact words through the door. She just heard the tone, the careful flatness of two people trying to be decent to each other during an indecent situation. When Sonia finally came out, her eyes were dry. She had made her decision long before he arrived and had already done her crying in private. When Hyunwoo walked out, he went straight to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and drank half of it while staring out the small window at the brick wall next door. "I'm sorry," Christabel said quietly. He turned around. "Don't be. She was honest. That's not nothing. Are you okay?" He looked at her with the exact same expression she had seen in room 214, the one she had spent 2 months trying to figure out. "I think I've been okay for a while," he said softly. "That's the part I need to sit with." Christabel nodded. He finished his water. He said goodbye to Sonia, who stood there looking formal and rigid, like she was holding herself together with both hands. He picked up his jacket. At the front door, he paused and turned back to Christabel. "The juke recipe. I'll send it to you. You should know how to make it." "I'm not a good cook," she said. "You can always try," he replied. Then he left. Christabel stared at the closed door for a moment. When she turned around, Sonia was watching her with a look of sudden, sharp realization. The look of a woman who had just discovered she was never the whole story. "Oh," Sonia whispered. "Don't," Christabel said. "Christabel." "I have studying to do," Christabel said, and walked away. 6 weeks passed. Sonia started dating someone new, a quiet civil engineer named David, who brought her actual flowers, did not have a secret wife, and seemed completely baffled by his own good fortune. Christabel found it incredibly reassuring. The atmosphere in the apartment shifted. Things became lighter. Christabel finished the renal chapter, moved into neurology, and developed opinions about the human brain that she suspected said a lot about her own. Hyunwoo texted occasionally, not often enough to mean something obvious, but not infrequently enough to mean nothing. He sent the juke recipe. She made it badly, texted him a photo of the disaster, and he replied with a voice note of himself. She played it 3 times, deleted it from her phone, and then immediately retrieved it from her recently deleted folder. She recognized this as highly suspicious behavior. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in December, she was cleaning the 14th floor of the Grand Mira Hotel. The elevator doors slid open, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out, followed by another. Both had the intense, urgent energy of people on official business. Behind them came a woman with a tablet and an earpiece, already speaking rapidly to someone in Korean. Christabel pressed her cleaning cart against the wall to let them pass. The woman with the tablet stopped, looked at her, and asked in English, "Is there a Choi Hyun-woo registered on this floor?" "I am not able to share guest information," Christabel replied professionally. The woman barked something in Korean to the men, then turned back to Christabel. "His father sent us, Chairman Choi. It is a family matter." "I'll get my supervisor," Christabel said. She was walking back with her manager, Ms. Anita, when the elevator opened again. Hyun-woo stepped out. He was still in his factory clothes and heavy work boots, holding a packed lunch tin under his arm. He looked like a man who had received a phone call on his break that had completely rearranged his world. He saw the men in suits and stopped. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When he opened them, he spoke to the woman with the tablet in Korean. His voice had completely changed. It wasn't louder or harsher, just heavier, the way a river sounds when the water gets deep. Less noise, more weight. The men in suits instantly adjusted their posture. The woman lowered her tablet. Christabel stood frozen by her cart, watching Choi Hyun-woo become someone else while remaining completely himself. She realized right then that the packed lunch tin, the work boots, and the correct brand of rice had never been an act. They were the truest things about him. The suits were just where he had come from. Ms. Anita nudged Christabel's elbow, taking in the scene with the speed of a woman who had managed hotel floors for 2 decades. "Nash," she whispered very quietly. "Do you know this man?" "I cleaned his room," Christabel said. "His father owns this hotel." Christabel blinked. "Well, that explains the towels." She hadn't meant to say it out loud. Hyun-woo, who was close enough to hear, turned and looked at her. He gave her that full, undivided attention that had been getting her into trouble since October. For the first time, it looked completely unguarded, honest, ridiculous, and impossible to hide. "I was going to tell you," he said. Christabel glanced down. "The packed lunch, Hyun-woo? I genuinely like that tin." A laugh burst out of her before she could stop it. echoing down the empty corridor. Ms. Anita looked between the two of them, completely reevaluating everything she thought she knew. Hyun-woo told the men in suits to give him a minute. They immediately stepped back. He walked over to Christabel, standing there in his dusty boots and lunch tin. "I need to go to Seoul for 2 weeks," he said. "My father decided I've learned enough humility for 1 year." "Has he met you?" she asked. "Christabel." "Hyun-woo." He took a breath. "I would like to call you on Friday evenings, if that's something you'd let me do." She thought about her father, who had always taught her that a man's true character is what he does when nobody important is watching. She thought about groceries, fixed door hinges, voice notes of his laughter, and the neat, left-leaning handwriting on the containers in her fridge. She thought about the 72 hotel rooms she had cleaned, and how she had never once stood in a corridor laughing next to her cart. "You can call," she said softly. "But I'm still not making the juke." He smiled. "I'll teach you properly this time. I'm a terrible student in the kitchen. You told me once that you explain things like someone who already understands them and is just remembering the words," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I think you're the same way about everything." She had absolutely no comeback for that. He gave her a real smile, the one she had first seen over a bowl of green beans. He turned, nodded to the men in suits, and they all straightened up and headed for the elevator. At the doors, he turned back one last time, looking at her like something he was incredibly glad to have found. The doors closed. Christabel stood in the corridor of the 14th floor with her cleaning cart and Ms. Anita. She had the distinct feeling of a woman who had just watched the rest of her life introduce itself and realized she really was going to have to learn how to make that rice porridge.